I'm getting ready to do a set of drum brakes on the rear of a early 90s S10 roughly. One thing we want to look at first is by figuring out which way the front is. Obviously this would probably be in the car and you would know which way the front is, obviously. But since we're doing this on a little table and we've just got it set up this way for easy demonstration purposes, we want to notice that there's two different things that tell us which way is the front. Okay, if you notice here, this shoe is smaller than this shoe. All right, now those are named two different things. This is the secondary shoe, this is the primary shoe. That tells us that we should know that our primary shoe is always facing the front and our secondary shoe is always facing the rear of the vehicle. The other thing I know that this is the rear of the vehicle is if you look right back in here, this is the emergency brake, or what we call now a parking brake cable, comes out through here, and there's a brake lever back here that it attaches to. And knowing where the parking brake cable comes in tells us that that's the front of the vehicle as well. Alright, so we want to make sure that that is how we have it set up. So another thing I like to do also is take a picture. Taking pictures just aids in the process. We can refer back to it a little bit later. We're going to take this apart, and I'll talk a little bit about some other stuff when we get it apart. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the return springs off, which are these, the yellow and orange. I'm going to take those off because it just personally aids in the process of it going back together. Now I can tell that there are a few things wrong with this currently. This bar here is backwards. It's actually rotated. It needs to be flipped over. Alright, now I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to take these springs off. First, I like to leave my hold down springs on. That way I don't have to hold the brake shoes in place. So that's kind of how I like to do it. We're going to use two tools today. We're going to use a pair of brake spring pliers and the hold down return spring, or hold down spring removal tool as well. Alright, so on this tool, there's a little tab on the end, and this will go around our anchor point up here at the very top. It allows us to get in there and use this tab to twist the spring off. So I'm going to get in here and wiggle that in, and then be careful, it is spring loaded, so it may come springing back out at you. Okay. Another thing I like to do is I like to put my springs down on the table or whatever it is I'm working on, kind of in the order I took them off. Okay, I know this spring kind of come off this side, so I'm gonna kind of put it in corresponding location. Alright, another thing we can do to take this spring off is we can take our little actuator arm and take it off the same way. Again, be careful, it is spring loaded. Alright, we want to pay attention to where we are taking our springs out of. I know we took this orange spring out of this round hole over here, and we took our yellow spring out of this round hole over here. Again, I like to take them off in order and put them the way I took them off. Alright, we're going to take our little actuator rod out and kind of put it in the same area on the table. Alright, we can take our keeper off now. I put it up on the top. I'm going to take this spring off here at the bottom, put it down on the table in order. Alright, now I'm going to try and take my park brake actuator rod out. Pull this over. Again, that was backwards. See how it's notched like this? And look at the back. So it kind of sits down in that groove a little bit, so we want to make sure we put that back in correctly. Alright, now I can go ahead and start taking off my hold down springs. I could take this spring off. It's under tension, so it's a little more difficult to get out. But I'm going to take the self-adjuster out. I'm going to try and get a little bit of leverage. There we go. There's my actuator. All right, I'm going to take this hold down spring off. Okay, I like to hold on the back side the hold down pin or nail while I'm pushing in on the spring. Here's my nail or pin. Okay, that's going to come out, and it comes out of this hole back here. All right, now here's my shoe, my primary shoe. It can go on either way, honestly. It's the same, everything basically is the same except for the shoe material. All right, so but the smaller material goes toward the front. All right, my last shoe to come off is that. Again, I'm holding the pin in so it doesn't fall out. Pull it out, put it on the side appropriately. Take my park brake cable rod or lever and put it on the table. So now I've got pretty much all my parts laid out on the table to where I'm going to be referring back to them here in just a minute. All right, something we want to look at once we get our shoes off. Okay, we want to look at these right here. This is where our shoes are going to ride on both sides. Okay, this one seems like it's pretty much gone. I could be wrong, but we want to make sure that that material is still there. Refer to service information to verify the thickness of those pads. All right, that'll tell you if the backing plate needs to be replaced or not. Okay, another thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at this wheel seal if we've got the car apart. All right, on this particular vehicle, it's a rear-wheel drive, which means there's an axle shaft that goes right through this hole. All right, and we're going to have a hub to where it's not as easy to work on, but we can still work on it. We just took the hub out to make it a little easier to work on and for demonstration purposes. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look for oil type of stuff on our backing plate. We've got a wheel cylinder up here. We're going to look at our wheel cylinder cups to make sure our seals, make sure they're in good working order and they're not leaking. Same thing with down here on the backing plate. If we see a bunch of oil looking stuff, that's probably going to be differential fluid, and this seal right here could be leaking. All right, obviously this seal's in some pretty rough shape, so that would be something we would want to replace. All right, we want to make sure we clean all of this off really, really well, all of our parts if we're going to be reusing those. You can buy a hardware kit from your local auto parts store. They make it fairly easy to get that kind of stuff, new shoes and drum replacement. All right, we've got it all disassembled. We're going to take it and put it back together now. All right, so if I was going to be putting it back together on an actual vehicle, I would be putting lubrication right here. It would be like an anti-seize or a synthetic brake fluid that just aids in the process of this little metal part of the shoe would ride up and down, and it prevents noises. Customers don't like noises, and neither do we. So I'd start lubricating. I'd put a little lube on my wheel cylinder tabs to kind of help with some noise as well. Maybe even put a little lube up here on the anchor point so it doesn't make noise also. All right, something we're also going to want to look at before we go back together. So we're going to want to look at our shoes. All right, if we're not replacing them and we're going to just reuse them, we're going to look for hard spots or cracking or any type of material that could cause us to have some issues. All right, grease spots would cause dragging, all that kind of stuff. We want to make sure it's all clean. All right. Another thing before we go back together, are pins that go in the backing plate right here on both sides, right here as well. Oftentimes we'll have issues getting the entire drum off the car. So it could be because our shoes and springs have hung up on the drum, causing some major issues. We can't get our drum off. So oftentimes we refer to these these springs that were right here as the hold down springs, correct? If we can get in behind our backing plate back here and cut this head off, that would actually enable us for a little bit of movement in our shoes to where maybe we can get our drum off a little bit easier. At that point, you would definitely need a hardware kit to replace all of that. All right, a little bit of tidbit information while it's off the car. Our hold down springs just look like this. All right, if you can see, there's a little groove or a slot in there. You can see my finger in the background. All right, our nail has a little head on it. It's gonna go through that slot and it's gonna rotate, and then it's gonna hold in place just like that. All right, you rotate. All right, and if you noticed earlier, that's what this tool right here is for. It allows us to push down on the spring and rotate it enough to get that nail head engaged. I like these ports on the side because it allows us to kind of look through to see where our head is. I don't know if you can see very well in that, but it allows us to see where the head is and then rotate accordingly. All right, so one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure I put my stuff back together the way it came off, or fix what was supposed to be fixed. All right, we're going to put some of my shoes. I'm going to start on this right side, or technically on the vehicle, the rear side of the shoe. I'm going to put it back together. All right, my parking brake rod or lever comes up here in the back. All right, and then this actuator is right here. I'm going to put my pin through, holding it on the back, and I like to take my thumb and hold my shoe in place. I'm going to hold my shoe in place with my thumb. Make sure we get that pin kind of in straight as best as possible. All right, at this point, I'm going to take my hold down spring tool, and I usually use one finger to hold the spring in place while I get it situated, and I can get out here and get a little bit more leverage, and then I'm going to push in and rotate, and that'll hold my hold down spring in accordingly. All right. I'm going to move over to the front side and do the same thing. Put my pin through, get my shoe in location, and then hold my shoe in place with my thumb. Take my hold down spring tool, load it with the spring using one finger to hold it in place. Move my hand back here a little bit to get some more leverage, and look through that gap at my nail. Looks like this is bent a little bit, so it's a little difficult to get in. All right. And it was hitting my shoe. My tool was hitting the shoe. Just made it a little difficult. All right. Make sure we get our shoe back on those tabs. That way it goes back together accordingly. All right. So I'm going to start kind of the same way I came apart. Put my spring on the bottom back here. All right. Put my self-adjuster back in. Now, notice there's a big old part down here of the spring and then kind of a small part. All right. Well, I took it off this way, but you also want to know that this is going to be able to rotate a little bit more freely when it's in that location. That's why that spring goes back on like that. It's very, very important. Okay. I got my self-adjuster back in place. Okay, my park brake lever is still in place. Okay, when we get it all back together, notice how my shoes are on the anchor point up here. It should be as close to that as possible once we get it all back together. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my spring in down here. Now, you don't have to put that in right now, but I will for right now. Okay, so now the easiest thing to put in next is going to be our actuator rod for our park brake. Okay, so what happens is when I pull on my park brake cable, this lever actuates this rod, and this rod pushes that, and it pushes my secondary shoe up against my drum. Okay, they call this a dual servo or duo servo because the action of this creates a reaction over here. All right, as this is applying to the drum, this is being pressed into the drum as well, and it's a dual action, which is nice. All right, this is a really good set for parking brake as well because it just tends to dig into the drum more and more when you have it set. That's the biggest advantages of drum brakes, is its parking brake capabilities. All right, now disc brakes really are far more superior than drum, but that's the only advantage that drums have over disc brakes. It's a little bit better holding capabilities. All right, now I'm going to put my keeper on, put it back on up here. Notice there is a lip up here compared to that, and that's just going to make sure we slide that on there. All right, and we're going to put this and connect it down here. If I can get it on. Okay. All right. Put our keeper back in place. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put my yellow spring back in now. All right, that's going to hold this rod in place. All right, something that this set of pliers does is it allows us to grab onto our anchor point up here, and it allows us for a prying point to pry that spring back into place. So it's going to look like this. So we put our spring over, we're going to pry onto our anchor point. Be careful not to slip off, which happens. Okay, that puts our spring back in place. All right, our last spring needs to go back in. Again, it goes into this hole and then it attaches up here. All right, the nice thing about this spring is we can use the same tool for right here. And there we go. We got it all put back together. It's pretty simple. If this was actually on the car, we would probably be ready to go back with our drum. Before we actually put our drum on, we want to make sure that our shoes are adjusted correctly. So we will adjust this down here accordingly, in or out. All right, so when we adjust this in or out, that puts our shoes out toward the drum. All right, when we get it measured correctly, we want just a little bit of drag on the drum when we rotate it. That's typically the best specification on the distance between the shoe and the drum. All right, that's how we disassemble and reassemble a duo servo drum brake system.